It's mine.
No, it's mine.
No, it's mine.
It's mine.
It's mine.
Give it here.
We've all been there. Siblings arguing over their favourite food or toy.
I deserve the money.
No, I deserve the money. I'm older.
That's not fair. I deserve it.
I deserve it.
It's mine.
But what happens when old sibling rivalries are reignited by the prospect of an unequal inheritance?
You earn more than me, so I should get more.
Yeah, but Mum preferred me, so I should get more.
Inheritance issues can fracture families, pulling them apart and causing permanent friction for generations. Today on Money Confidential, is it ever okay to have a favourite child and give them a bigger inheritance? Welcome to Money Confidential with me, Katie Morley. Each episode I head up and down the country to hear directly from you, lifting the curtain on real-life dramas and delving into the stories of financial deception, disputes and strained relationships. Today, we tackle the tricky topic of inheritance. It can cause disputes and bad blood following the death of a loved one. But what would you do if your parents, while still alive, decided to change their will in favour of your spoilt sibling? Well, that's exactly what happened to Melanie, whose email dropped into the Money Confidential inbox a while back. Today, her problem is voiced by an actor.
I've always been a bit of an outsider in my family due to going to boarding school at a very early age. My mother and father worked their way out of poverty and wanted me to have a good education away from the town where I grew up. It was their way of giving me the best start, but it meant I only came home twice a year. When my brother came along 6 years later, our circumstances were markedly different. My parents worked hard and amassed a lot of wealth and had moved to an area closer to good schools. He lived at home until he was 24, so he has a very tight bond with both my parents, whereas I've been out of the family unit since the age of 6 and often feel like a guest in their house. My circumstances made me very independent, but made my brother very spoiled. He relies on my parents for childcare, tags onto their holidays so that they pay for him and his family, and often leaves his children there for the school holidays so he and his wife can take a break. I am a single mother with a baby, and my brother has twin boys. I manage okay and work full time, but it has been a struggle at times, financially, but especially without the emotional support of my family or a partner. Recently, we were called to our parents' house so they could tell us that they have changed how they are distributing our inheritance. Instead of splitting it 50-50 between my brother and I, they have decided to split into 6 parts. 4 parts for my brother, so they can include his partner and their twins, and 2 parts for my son and I. It feels like a slap in the face, but at the same time I feel rotten complaining about it. My brother joked that it's the reward for staying at home and working on a marriage while having more children, which just feels so unfair and typical of how my brother and I have been treated our whole lives. I don't know how to broach it with my parents without seeming ungrateful, but I feel if I don't have the conversation, it will drive us further apart.
Thank you, Melanie, for reaching out. And remember, you can do exactly the same thing with any money-based dilemma you want to get off your chest. Email me at moneyconfidential@telegraph.co.uk. Wow, it's a biggie this week. I'm sure we can all relate to an inheritance-based conundrum, and for some, it can make the blood boil. For this topic, and someone keeping a cool head, is Jessica McGawley, an expert versed in both financial and family dynamics. Jessica, welcome to the show. What do you think about Melanie's story?
Well, I feel for Melanie because it's unfortunately a very common issue. So she shouldn't feel alone in it. It happens. But again, like, as we know, money is not a widely talked about topic, certainly not in our country. And so she may be feeling very alone and that she's the only one dealing with this, which she's not. I'd like to go straight into some solutions, if that's all right.
Oh, please do. Please.
Okay. So when I was looking at this situation, I thought, well, I really feel for Melanie. And over the years, what I've worked out does and doesn't work. Well, mostly what doesn't work is trying to find out who's right and who's wrong. Because it's all about perspective, and you're most likely going to end up in a greater problem and a more segregated family if your intentions are just trying to find out who's right versus who's wrong.
Because that would be an argument that could go on all day and night, couldn't it?
Oh,
for
and
weeks.
You could bring it, well, and it could involve legal disputes and teams and and frankly, spending a lot more money trying to solve it. So I think, first of all, can everyone come to the table with an intention of how do we move forward with this as a we? This is a we problem. This is not you versus me. How are we going to fix this? And without trying to use too psychological language, but this is because this is a family human dynamic challenge, I would really encourage NVC, which is non-violent communication style language, which is all very much.
What is that?
It's language that is, it's a communication style that it's about finding a solution in a very empathetic way. So you're always trying to come at the challenge with empathy, looking at the other person's situation and really considering tone all the way through. Because as we know, you can tackle most problems with the right tone and you'll get a very different outcome, even if the content is the same. And it's also it's a structured way of having a difficult conversation. So, for example, shall I give it to you?
Please. Yes, come on, let's have it.
All right, for Melanie, I prepared this for her. Step 1, state the facts. Okay, not emotionally, just state the facts. Say, okay, so I understand you've changed the distribution in our inheritance from 50-50 to 60-40. That's the fact. We're not adding any emotion to it. That's clear as day. Step 2, you state how the fact has made you feel. That's where you add in the emotion. Now, she might want to say, whilst of course I'm grateful for this inheritance, I was quite surprised and upset by this because for me, it emphasizes what feels like greater differences and challenges within our family dynamics.
Because she's very concerned not to come across as ungrateful. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, exactly. I do really feel for her with that because she's trying to navigate so many complexities and so many dynamics here. Step 3 is offering a solution. So you're not just coming to this with, I'm upset, here's a problem. You're saying, here's the solution I'm giving you. I would like, as a starting point, to be able to have a conversation about my feelings regarding this and to discuss the inheritance structure because it has impacted me and the wider family dynamics. So you're saying, this is step 1, state the facts. Step 2 is how it's made her feel. Step 3, offer the solution. And then lastly, and very importantly, step 4 is how, by doing all of these things will get better. So saying, by doing this, it's going to really help me understand your perspective and hopefully you understand mine. And I want our relationship to be better. So you're not making it about the money, you're making it about the dynamics, the relationship.
Yeah, so it's not going in. The tempting thing would be to say, right, I'm not happy with this. I want 50-50, like it was before. So resist that urge.
As hard as it will be.
Yeah, and that is a lot of tongue biting, isn't it, for her? And maybe self-preparation as well. I mean, how does she sort of prepare herself to go into this thing?
Okay, very, very good point. So I would apply this rule to, frankly, anyone who's having a difficult conversation about anything. It doesn't need to be money, which is you need to go in there with as much data and as little emotion as possible. Because the minute you start raising the tone or arms are flailing or people stop listening to the content, and of course, some emotion is important, but we've got to stick with the content. So I would say, first of all, you go and offload all of that emotion to your friend, your therapist, your other half, whoever is in your life that can provide that for you, so that when you get
or our podcast.
Exactly.
Well, look, I think some incredible practical advice for Melanie there. I'd like to just circle back round, though, to her history here, her childhood. It seems like there's some really, really deep-seated history and issues here with Melanie and her family. She was shipped off to boarding school at a very young age, something which I know from other people that I've spoken to can ignite a lot of trauma response, attachment issues, that sort of thing. But then there's this really quite severe sounding unfairness between the brother and sister. It does seem like they've been treated incredibly differently for decades. Is that ever acceptable in a family?
Though it is normal that you will have different dynamics. But when it comes to such practical, let alone the emotional, but these practical elements not being communicated, that is very, very tough. But I think what we're also looking at here is a cultural shift. So Melanie's parents started in a what sounds like low-income household. Is that fair? And then moved into a more affluent one. And what we tend to forget is that that is a cultural shift, and that things will have changed, some good, some bad. Everyone assumes that as you create more wealth, things only get better, but actually this isn't the case, as we know, and that you can become more separated. I mean, even just some of the families I work with who live in incredibly big houses, I think on a practical level, oh my gosh, you're just so physically far away from each other. It sounds like their intention was to do the best by her and send her off to a school where she could get a good education. But what young people need to understand when they go off to boarding school is, and it to be reiterated, is that they still have a place in the home, and we're not physically there. Their presence is still felt, and that they are missed and remembered, and they're not forgotten. And for families that I work with who do send their children to boarding school, I really feel for them, because they do think they're doing the best for them. But then when they come back, or in their later years, they reflect on the trauma of being separated from their parents at such a young age. They need to repair that. Good parenting is rupture repair. We rupture all the time, but it's about repairing.
Is it common for people to kind of find themselves in middle age and huge unfairnesses or trauma from their childhood is still following them around and affecting their everyday life?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. We're all carrying this sort of invisible backpack that we load up. And for some of us, it will be you're carrying around what are seemingly big traumas, things like somebody passing away unexpectedly, parents divorcing, moving school houses, which can be difficult for young people. But then it can be very seemingly small things, like an embarrassing moment on stage as a child, and you don't forget these things. So it's about, I would say, imagine you've got a cupboard and all of the drawers are these different traumas or memories. It's about unpacking them. And some of them will take longer, and some of them will need professional guidance, and others you could hopefully work through with your loved ones.
And how common is it, do you think, to get a bit older into adulthood and look back and think, goodness me, I was not the favourite child?
Yeah, I know. That's really tough.
How unfair on me.
How unfair. And there's not much you can do about that with the person, because I think we have to remember, so Melanie is in the position where her parents are around. She can have that conversation with them. It doesn't mean that she'll get the response she wants. As the listeners here, we're hoping that they'll turn around and say, you're absolutely wrong. We're so sorry, darling, that you feel that way, and we love you just as much. But she might.
I think that's what she desperately wants them to say, and suddenly be these amazing parents that she's always wanted. But I just have a horrible feeling that it's not going to turn out like that for her. And I think that's I really feel for Melanie on this.
She's the eldest. She's a single mother. She probably makes it look easy. She probably just looks like she's got it as hard as it is. She's getting on with life, and therefore she has been in effect kind of effectively punished for that.
Yeah, that's how she feels. That is how she feels. And and it's not just about the kind of emotional support, is it? The money stuff has crystallized that feeling for her.
Money represents exactly the dynamics, which is he is being rewarded for not necessarily getting on with stuff and for not launching into life, but she did. She didn't have a choice. She had to grow up fast, especially if you go to boarding school at a young age. You do grow up fast.
How often in your clinics do you see parents financially favouring one child over another?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the families I work with do have financial advice. They have maybe a trust, family office, a wealth manager who will hopefully be advising them not to do that. But in the instances where they aren't and they are financially favouring them, sometimes it's out of guilt. There's that child may be suffering with, be it physical, mental health, learning disabilities. And even though that's not on them, but sometimes they feel that the best way to caveat that or support that is financially. So it's the typical throwing money at a problem. And in other situations, they probably wouldn't tell you this outright, but yeah, there was financial favoritism, and that's because it is the favored child.
And is that ever right?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think it's very normal on a I mean, I've got 2 children. I'll have days where one is definitely more in my good books than the other, depending on behavior. There's nothing they can do for me to love them less.
Of course, but inheritances are another matter, aren't they? An incredibly emotionally charged aspect of our finances. How commonly do you see this 60-40 or even more extreme divide in the estate between siblings?
Well, it's also very commonly, but it's also challenged when there are, let's say, mixed families or where there's been a big gap. So actually, Melanie and her brother's gap isn't that big. When you've got families where there's a gap of 10 years or more, then it's there's even more weight to it, because there'll be people working maybe within the family business. That's another added complexity. What do you do if there are 5 children, 3 of them work in the family business, but 2 don't? How do they get rewarded? These are the sorts of problems that some of these families have. And I know some people listening might think, oh, that's not a problem. They've got money, they've got privilege, but they are problems, because initially the people who started the business, the parents, grandparents, or so on and so forth, they set out to create a better life for themselves and their next generation. And then all these many years on, what's happening is it's causing a rift. I always say it's about intention. It's about having really clear intentions about why you're making the money still. Because more money is just more money.
Yes, and it's about, as you say, as long as the intention was obviously to be fair, then at the end of the day, most people are going to turn around and say, okay, well, they were trying to be fair.
Yes, but
even if
also
it's not 100% ideal what they've done, I can see the intention.
Yeah, and to be very clear all the way along that this is a gift, not a right, and that we should have clear expectations about what this means, and that circumstances change. And if circumstances do change, this inheritance might change.
Thank you so much to Jessica McGawley there. It's a really interesting one. It's obviously your right to distribute your wealth as you see fit. And if you want to split it equally between grandchildren, then it's your choice. But then again, is it not simpler to keep it as an exact split between your children? And then leave it down to them on how they want to divvy it up among their own children. Let me know your honest thoughts. Are the parents being fair? Is this problem purely financial, or does it go deeper? Email me at moneyconfidential@telegraph.co.uk and we'll sum up your thoughts later on in the series. Coming up after the break, we hear from Michael Deacon, Telegraph columnist and owner of many strong opinions. Back in a mo. Welcome back to Money Confidential. Real people, real problems, and real talk. With me, Katie Morley. Before we hear from our next guest, I wanted to share some of your thoughts on last week's story. For those who missed it, we asked, would you risk a lifelong friendship by turning down an invite to a hen do or a wedding? We heard from people feeling the pressure to say yes to expensive commitments, and one wedding that caused friction between our guest Pooja and her close childhood friend, whose decision to get married abroad came with a huge cost, financially and to their friendship. An anonymous listener wrote in to say, when you choose to get married abroad, you have to accept that you're alienating people. It's a big ask. From the travel to the time off work and costs, you need to weigh up the pros and cons and accept that not everyone will be there. If this includes the people that are important to you, it might be the time to rethink your decision. I'm a big believer that true friends are the ones who are consistently there during the bad times and struggles. It's amazing how many people come out the woodwork when there's something fun to celebrate, and you rarely see them when the going gets tough. I've got a bridesmaid who can't attend my hen party, but in the wider context of our friendship, she's an incredible friend who shows up when I need her, and she's an incredibly loyal and wonderful person. That being said, it doesn't negate any hurt or disappointment either party may feel, but in the wider context of their friendship, surely this holds more importance than someone not being able to show up for one day. Exactly. What's more important, a friend for life or one day in your life? Another listener, Anne, has an example of how it can be done. We couldn't attend my daughter's wedding, but it was all done with the best of motives. She and her fiancé had moved to Canada, so rather than subjecting their family and friends to the, in some cases, unaffordable expense that they would incur by attending, they eloped and had a beautiful ceremony by a lake in the British Columbia, planned well in advance as part of a long-anticipated road trip to Yellowstone National Park. How A, they kept the secret from us, and B, kept the dress so beautifully whilst camping is a mystery. I was obviously a little teary-eyed when they told us parents, but also very proud at their thoughtfulness. I'm sure we're all looking forward to celebrating with them when they come over to the UK next year. Well, Anne, I think you're being very good about it, because I'm not sure how a lot of other people would feel about their children getting married in secret. Now, let's get back to today's dilemma. We heard from Melanie, who recently found out that her parents had unfairly split her inheritance in favour of her spoiled brother, and she's not happy about it. I'm joined in the studio by Michael Deacon. So what do you make of all this, Michael?
I think, having heard Melanie's story, I think there's a serious lesson here for any young people listening, teenagers or even children who are listening, which is that if you want to have a good, happy, comfortable life and do well for yourself, the most important thing you can do is to be lazy, spoiled, clingy, generally incompetent, and then your parents will take pity on you and they'll give you lots of money and they'll look after your children for you and you'll have a nice easy time and they'll leave you loads of money in your will and it will be brilliant. However, if you make the mistake of being hardworking, strong and independent, then your parents will think, oh, well, this child doesn't need any help at all. She's fine as she is. And so you'll get no help at all and they'll reduce your inheritance. So that's something to bear in mind as a young person, I think.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
In some ways, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel angry for Melanie here. She was shipped off to boarding school at a young, tender age. Now, I don't know whether you've got any experience of boarding school. I don't,
No,
but
I'm
I do
afraid not.
have friends that have been shipped off at a very young age, and I do think it is very difficult. She was only going home twice a year.
Right.
It's not much
right.
contact with the parents, is it? So it seems like she has basically been brought up to be away from them and not close to them.
Yes.
Whereas the brother has been absolutely mollycoddled, maybe?
Yes. And I think that's the real reason for unhappiness here. I don't think fundamentally it's about the money. I think it's about a feeling of rejection.
Yeah.
You know, the implication here is that because she's getting a smaller proportion of the inheritance than her brother is, she feels less loved. And she was feeling that anyway because she was having less contact from, she was hardly seeing them at all as a child, whereas he's had all the attention. And so it's a feeling of rejection. That's what's causing her resentment. It's not about money. I mean, I think...
the money's crystallised it, hasn't it, I think?
Yes. You know, this has brought it into sharp relief. This has put a mathematical figure on the parents' love, I think. And that's why she's so unhappy. That's the real reason. I mean, of course, when it comes to inheritance, ultimately, it's the parents' decision. It's their money. They earned it. But I think even so, when it comes to your children, you've got to have an equal split. Otherwise, what you're going to leave behind you is a legacy of resentment and conflict. It could end up in court. Your children could end up squabbling in the courts over who deserves what of your money. So you've got to make it equal no matter what.
I completely agree with you. And I think I have spoken to Melanie. She's voiced by an actor on this podcast, but I have spoken to her in quite great length. And she doesn't need this money. You're right. Your instinct was right. She's doing really well for herself. But she would have liked it.
Yeah, of
And
course.
it is about the principle.
Yeah, feeling that you are equal, that your parents love you and your brother equally. That's what it's about. And now she finds it impossible to feel that, and so she feels rejected. And that's the key to this. But, you know, maybe it explains something. We all know that in this country and other Western countries, the birth rate is plummeting, and a huge number of couples now decide only to have one child or even no children at all. And maybe this is the reason, so they can avoid all this kind of resentment and conflict and legal squabbling. Because
And they
if you've
don't
got
have
only
to
one
pick a
child,
favourite.
you don't have to pick a favourite. You just leave everything to the one child, and it's not. He doesn't have to split it with anyone, or she, and they can't very well sue themselves, can they?
Easy
so
peasy,
it's fine. So you avoid all this kind of conflict. So maybe it's just simpler.
Just simpler to have one. Well, I think
Just
me
the
and
one.
you've only got one child, haven't we?
That's right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we don't have to worry about
We
this.
don't have to
So
worry about this.
I'm feeling quite lucky and relieved now, actually.
Me too. Now, just circling back to your other point, Michael, because you made a really fun but also serious point at the beginning about what are we incentivising our children to do? Do we want them to be lazy and sponging off us and needy, or do we want them to be independent like Melanie and making our own way in the world? And is it okay to treat kids differently depending on which way they're going? Some parents will, let's say, pay for one child to go to private school because they feel that child needs it, but not another child that they think doesn't need it. One may go off to be an investment banker, one may go off to be a supermarket worker, and they may give the supermarket worker a house deposit but think the investment banker doesn't need it. Is that fair?
Well, it's not fair. I mean, the example you've just given there, I mean, that's quite an extreme case. Now, yes, certainly if you had two children, one of them was a billionaire and the other one was on the breadline, then I think you would have an excuse, and I think that your billionaire child would understand that they were not being given a free house, whereas the child on the breadline was. That's an extreme example. But where it's a bit closer, like in Melanie's example here, then I think you have to be equal, because otherwise you're just storing up resentment and conflict for the future. So I think... only in an extreme case can you treat your children differently. Unless, of course, it were the richer, more successful child who makes the suggestion themselves. If you had a very well-off child and a much poorer child, and then the rich one says, well, look, mum and dad, I don't need the money, so why don't you just give it to my poorer sibling? Well, that would be very generous if they were to suggest that. But from the parents' point of view, without that suggestion, I think you have to keep it equal. Otherwise, I mean, who knows what's in store? Could go to court. The children might never speak again. Who knows? It's just not worth it, is it?
I think it's just not worth it. I think I completely agree with you there. But what about when you're passing it to grandchildren? Because it's interesting how these grandparents have decided to dish out the will. So Melanie has one child and no partner, whereas the brother has twins, so two children and a partner. So they've given 4 parts to the brother and his family and 2 parts to Melanie and her child. Now, when I spoke to Melanie, it actually wasn't her choice to only have one child. She unfortunately split up with her husband, and it just never happened. So she's not single by her own choice as well. So... It feels like she's being punished.
Well, exactly that. That's the crucial thing for me. It's not just about the children. The fact that the brother's wife or girlfriend, whatever she is, she's receiving a cut as well. So in a way, yes, Melanie is being punished for being single here, as if somehow that was a fault on her part. And so that money that's going to the sister-in-law would otherwise have been going to Melanie.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, even lots of people decide to give money directly to grandchildren for tax reasons or just because they think the children don't need it. But where there's an unequal number of kids on each side, do you think that it's right to give the kids equal amounts? Or should you split it as in equal to the kids and then split it for those kids?
I tend to think I would just leave all the inheritance to my own children, and then and leave it at that. And make that equal, and then it's up to those children to give to their own children from that, if that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
I think it becomes very complicated if you start handing out money to your grandchildren or great grandchildren, things like that, because there might be different numbers on different sides. And then again, that's another recipe for conflict and resentment, isn't it? I think best just to split it between the next generation and keep it equal. Otherwise, you could create a huge fuss.
Yeah, exactly.
Recipe for squabbling.
Situations change as well. I mean, imagine if you made a will and then another grandchild came along or something.
Yeah.
They were left out.
It's just too complicated. It's too risky. Keep it simple, I think.
So what's your advice to Melanie then when she brings this up with her parents? Because she's gonna have it out with them.
Well, this is a nightmare scenario, because we know that she feels resentment not just about this, but about her childhood, because she was treated so differently from her brother, and then into adult life as well. I think there's a great risk here that anger is going to come bubbling up. She's going to say things she regrets. She's going to get really angry here.
Yeah.
They'll be defensive about it. The row could escalate. And she could end up being, I don't want this to happen. I'm touching wood and hoping that it doesn't. But, who knows where this row could lead? They might choose, in a fit of pique, they might choose to cut her out of the will altogether. It's really risky.
I don't
feel
want that the
to happen,
anger bubbling up from the letter.
It's a real risk, because the parents might think, well, hey, it's our money, it's our decision. You're just being spoilt, demanding more money. And both sides can end up saying things they regret, saying things that are very unwise, and it could end with an even worse row. And so ultimately, I think even though I think she's been treated unjustly, it is very, very difficult to broach that subject because, the parents will get defensive, I think.
Whichever way you cut it, you're kind of going in with your hand held out, aren't you? I want more. And that's a really...
It's a recipe for family conflict. That's why, although I'm afraid I feel that she's been treated unjustly, and I blame the parents for that. The parents have been unwise, I think, in what they've done. I think it's very difficult to broach the subject for her to go to them and demand more, because I think it could go horribly wrong.
Words of advice to her going into this awful conversation.
Well, I don't mean to sound unkind or indeed cowardly here, but I might want to, I'd be tempted to avoid the conversation and just accept that that's how it is. I might be wrong, of course, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope she finds a really diplomatic and sensitive way of putting it, and then the parents come to their senses. I mean, I would like the parents to come to their senses of their own accord and make it fairer and make the split equal between their two children. That's what they should do. But I just feel that having a row with them risks making things even worse.
So instead of having two parts of the inheritance, she might have nothing.
She might do. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic. I hope I am, but this is my fear with this.
I think you're being cautious, Michael, and we need a bit of that sometimes. Yeah.
Well, I hope we find out either way. I hope Melanie will let us know how it goes.
We'll have to catch up with her in the new year, won't we?
Yes, I hope so, because I really do want to find out how it goes, and I hope it's good news.
Christmas could be interesting in this household, couldn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
Michael Deacon, thank you very much. Where can people find more of your sage wisdom?
Oh, right, in the Daily Telegraph, every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. That's the print edition. Online as well, of course.
There we have it. I think the thing that I'm taking away from today's conversation is that the most important thing when divvying up an inheritance is to make your intention clear. And in most cases, fairness will be at the heart of it. We get a lot of letters about inheritance, and next week we'll turn the tables and hear from a parent who's worried about their wealth falling into the hands of a pair of monstrous in-laws. Oh, juicy! If there's something you want to get off your chest, email me at moneyconfidential@telegraph.co.uk or fill in the form by the link below. It takes about 60 seconds and can be totally anonymous and sometimes even fun. Who doesn't love typing into a form? Thank you for listening to Money Confidential. Please do help grow the show by rating on your podcast app and leaving a nice review. You can find me on Instagram at moneybackmorley. Today's episode was produced by Hannah Walker-Brown. Sound design and mixing, and the series producer is Giles Gear. Ta-ta for now, sausage.